The forest was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Towering trees with iridescent leaves shimmered under the alien sun, casting hues of green and purple across the ground. Strange bird-like creatures flitted between the branches, their calls echoing through the air in a symphony that felt both foreign and oddly soothing. It wasn't Earth, but it wasn't hostile either, at least not yet. The soldier adjusted his position by the small fire he'd managed to build using dry twigs and moss-like plants native to this planet. He held a skewer over the flames, turning it slowly as the meat sizzled and released an aroma that made his stomach growl. His name was Arlen Voss, though most people back on Earth would have called him nothing more than Grunt. A lifetime spent training for combat missions had left little room for anything else. But here, alone in this strange wilderness, there was no one to remind him of who he was supposed to be. Just him, the forest, and the task at hand: survive until extraction day. Arlen glanced down at the chunk of meat impaled on the stick, a creature he'd caught earlier while scouting the area. Its fur-like hide reminded him of something from Earth's past, maybe a cross between a rabbit and a lizard, but its taste promised to be far richer than anything freeze-dried rations could offer. He smirked to himself, thinking about how absurdly satisfying it felt to eat something fresh after weeks of pre-packaged meals. As he turned the skewer again, a voice shattered the silence behind him. "Can I join you?" Startled, Arlen spun around, nearly dropping the skewer into the fire. Standing just a few paces away was a figure so unexpected that it took his breath away. She stood tall, her lithe frame wrapped in what appeared to be woven fibers dyed in vibrant shades of blue and silver. Her skin glowed faintly, like moonlight reflecting off water, and her eyes, those were what truly caught his attention. They weren't human. They sparkled with shifting colors, as if they contained entire galaxies within them. Her hair cascaded down her back in waves of midnight black streaked with streaks of electric violet. For a moment, neither of them moved. Arlen's hand instinctively hovered near the holster strapped to his thigh, though he didn't draw his weapon. There was something about her presence, calm, curious, that stopped him from reacting defensively. Finally, he found his voice. "You speak my language?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. She smiled, revealing teeth that gleamed like polished pearls. "I've learned many languages," she replied smoothly. "Yours was intriguing." Intriguing? That wasn't exactly the word Arlen would have chosen, but he nodded anyway. "Sure. Yeah, you can sit if you want." He gestured awkwardly toward the log beside him. Without hesitation, she stepped closer and settled herself gracefully onto the log. Up close, Arlen noticed details he hadn't seen before: the intricate patterns etched into her clothing, the delicate webbing between her fingers, and the faint hum of energy emanating from her skin. She smelled faintly of flowers and earth, a scent that seemed to belong entirely to this place. "I'm Arlen," he said finally, feeling the need to introduce himself even though she already knew his name. "And I am Naira," she responded, her gaze never leaving his face. "You're not from here." It wasn't a question, but Arlen answered anyway. "Nope. Just passing through. You live around here." Naira tilted her head, mimicking his earlier gesture. "This is my home. These woods are mine to protect." "Protect?" Arlen raised an eyebrow. "From what? Doesn't look like much danger out here." Her expression darkened slightly, and for the first time since she arrived, Arlen sensed tension radiating from her. "There are things in these forests that even your kind might fear," she said cryptically. "But enough of that. Tell me, Arlen, why do you cook your food over fire? Is it a ritual?" He chuckled, relaxing a bit despite himself. "Not really. Cooking makes it safer to eat. Plus, it tastes better." Naira leaned forward, her luminous eyes fixed on the sizzling meat. "May I try some?" Arlen hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Sure thing. Just let me finish roasting it." They sat in companionable silence as the meat cooked, the crackling of the fire filling the space between them. When it was ready, Arlen carefully tore off a piece and handed it to her. Naira accepted it delicately, inspecting it for a moment before taking a small bite. Her reaction was immediate and unexpected. "This is delightful!" she exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine surprise. "Such bold flavors. How do you achieve such mastery?" Arlen couldn't help but laugh. "Mastery? Nah, it's just survival cooking. Back where I come from, everyone does it." Naira tilted her head again, clearly intrigued. "Your world sounds fascinating. Perhaps someday you'll tell me more about it." "Maybe," Arlen said, though he doubted he'd get the chance. His mission here was straightforward: gather intel, stay alive, and await extraction. Bonding with locals, even ones as captivating as Naira, wasn't part of the plan. Still, as the evening wore on, conversation flowed easily between them. Naira spoke of her life in the forest, describing how she communed with the wildlife and drew energy from the land itself. In turn, Arlen shared stories of his own travels, not classified details of her course, but tales of camaraderie among soldiers and the occasional humorous mishap during training exercises. At one point, Naira laughed so hard at one of his anecdotes that tears sparkled at the corners of her eyes. "Your species is strange," she admitted, still grinning. "But perhaps not entirely unpleasant." "Gee, thanks," Arlen shot back, feigning offense. "Coming from someone who glows in the dark, that means a lot." Her laughter rang out again, echoing through the forest like music. For the first time in what felt like forever, Arlen felt something other than duty or exhaustion. He felt alive. But as the night deepened, shadows began to creep in, not just from the trees, but from somewhere deeper. Naira's playful demeanor shifted subtly, becoming more guarded. She glanced frequently toward the edge of the clearing, her glowing eyes scanning the darkness. "What is it?" Arlen asked, noticing her change in behavior. "Something stirs," she murmured softly. "We should extinguish the fire." Before he could respond, a low rumble reverberated through the ground beneath them. The sound sent a chill racing up Arlen's spine. It was unlike anything he'd heard before, a guttural growl mixed with a metallic screech. Whatever it was big. And it was getting closer. Naira rose swiftly to her feet, her movements fluid and deliberate. "Come," she urged, extending a hand toward him. "We must move quickly." Arlen hesitated for only a moment before grabbing his gear and following her lead. As they darted into the dense foliage, the fire flickered once behind them before dying completely, plunging the clearing into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, the ominous sound grew louder, accompanied now by the snapping of branches and the unmistakable sensation of being hunted. Despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, Arlen couldn't shake the thought that whatever was pursuing them, Naira knew more about it than she was letting on. For now, though, he trusted her guidance. They were running together, two strangers bound by the urgency of survival. And perhaps, something more. As they raced through the forest, dodging thick roots and leaping over fallen logs, Arlen couldn't help but marvel at Naira's agility. She moved like liquid light, weaving effortlessly between the trees as if she were part of the forest itself. Every step she took seemed calculated, every turn precise. Meanwhile, Arlen struggled to keep up, his boots slipping on patches of moss and his lungs burning from exertion. Still he pushed forward, driven by instinct and the gnawing sense that stopping meant certain death. The creature, or creatures, behind them showed no signs of relenting. The guttural growls had grown louder, almost deafening now, punctuated by the occasional crash of something massive colliding with the underbrush. Branches snapped violently, sending shards flying in all directions. Arlen risked a glance over his shoulder and immediately regretted it. Through the gaps in the foliage, he caught glimpses of hulking silhouettes moving too quickly for their size, their jagged forms illuminated intermittently by bursts of bioluminescence from nearby plants. One of them paused to sniff the air, its elongated snout twitching grotesquely before it emitted a piercing shriek that echoed through the forest. "They're gaining on us!" Arlen shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of noise. Naira didn't respond verbally but instead grabbed his wrist mid-stride, pulling him sharply to the left. They veered off the makeshift path they'd been following, diving deeper into the tangled heart of the forest. The canopy above grew denser, blotting out what little light remained, and the air became heavy with a scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation. Arlen stumbled once, catching himself against a tree trunk slick with moisture, but Naira yanked him upright without missing a beat. "Stay close," she commanded, her tone firm yet calm. "Do exactly as I say." Arlen nodded, his chest heaving as he fought to steady his breathing. "Got it. Lead the way." Moments later, they reached a narrow ravine concealed by thick vines. Naira crouched low, motioning for Arlen to do the same. Together, they slipped into the crevice, pressing themselves flat against the cool stone wall as the sounds of pursuit thundered overhead. Arlen clenched his jaw, willing himself to remain silent despite the pounding of his heart. The creatures passed mere feet away, their monstrous shapes casting distorted shadows across the ravine's opening. He could hear them sniffing the air, their claws scraping against rocks as they searched for their prey. When the noises finally faded into the distance, Naira exhaled softly and turned to face him. Her luminous eyes glimmered even in the dim light, betraying a mixture of relief and lingering tension. "That was close," she whispered. "Close doesn't begin to cover it," Arlen muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "What the hell were those things?" Naira hesitated, her expression growing somber. "They are called Scarveth, predators native to this region. Normally, they hunt smaller prey, but sometimes—" She trailed off, her gaze flickering toward the mouth of the ravine. "Sometimes, they become drawn to outsiders." "Outsiders," Arlen repeated, his brow furrowing. "You mean me?" "Yes," she admitted reluctantly. "Your arrival disrupted the balance of this place. The Scarveth sensed your presence and came looking. They are relentless hunters." Arlen frowned, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Great. So being here is basically painting a giant target on my back." "It's not just you," Naira countered, her tone softening. "They would have come for anyone unfamiliar to these woods. This is why I warned you earlier. These lands are not safe for those who do not understand them." Arlen opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. Now wasn't the time to dwell on the dangers of this alien world. Instead, he focused on the present moment, the fact that they were still alive, however tenuously. "All right, then what's the plan? We can't stay holed up in here forever." Naira considered this for a moment before nodding decisively. "We need to reach higher ground. There's a plateau not far from here where we can regroup and assess our next move. The Scarveth won't follow us there, it's sacred territory." "Sacred territory?" Arlen echoed skeptically. "What makes it sacred?" Naira's lips curved into a faint smile, though it lacked humor. "Let's just say the plateau holds significance beyond your understanding. Trust me, it will keep us safe." With no other options readily available, Arlen decided to take her word for it. They waited several more minutes to ensure the coast was clear before emerging cautiously from the ravine. The forest around them seemed eerily quiet now, as if holding its breath. Even the strange birds that had filled the air with song earlier had gone silent. Arlen scanned the area warily, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm, though he doubted bullets would do much good against creatures like the Scarveth. Naira led the way once more, her steps sure and unhurried despite the lingering threat. As they climbed steadily uphill, the terrain grew rougher, forcing Arlen to focus intently on each step to avoid losing his footing. Despite the physical strain, he found himself stealing glances at Naira whenever possible. There was something mesmerizing about the way she moved, as if she were dancing rather than walking. Her confidence was magnetic, drawing him in despite everything else happening around them. After what felt like hours, but was likely no more than 30 minutes, they reached the base of the plateau. A steep incline stretched upward, dotted with protruding rocks and patches of clinging vegetation. Naira paused briefly to catch her breath, leaning against a boulder while Arlen joined her. "You okay?" he asked, noting the slight flush in her cheeks. She nodded, though her smile wavered. "I'm fine. Just unused to traveling so quickly." "Yeah, well, outrunning monsters tends to speed things up," Arlen quipped, attempting to lighten the mood. To his relief, Naira chuckled softly. "You humans have such peculiar ways of coping with danger," she remarked, shaking her head. "But I suppose it's effective." Before Arlen could respond, a distant roar echoed through the valley below, sending a shiver down his spine. The Scarveth weren't giving up. If anything, their cries sounded angrier now, fueled by bloodlust. Naira straightened abruptly, her playful demeanor vanishing. "We need to keep moving," she urged, gesturing toward the plateau. "Hurry." They scrambled up the incline as fast as they dared, their progress slowed by loose gravel and treacherous footing. Twice, Arlen nearly lost his balance, only to be steadied by Naira's quick reflexes. Each time, their hands lingered for a fraction longer than necessary, sparking a warmth that spread through him despite the cold sweat trickling down his back. Finally, they reached the top. The plateau unfolded before them like a hidden sanctuary, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. At its center stood an ancient structure, a circle of towering stones etched with intricate carvings that pulsed faintly with an inner light. The air here felt different, charged with an energy that prickled against Arlen's skin. It was peaceful yet powerful, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd left behind. Naira approached the stones reverently, placing a hand on one of them. The glow intensified momentarily, casting her features in an ethereal light. "We're safe here," she said quietly, turning to face him. "For now." Arlen nodded, lowering himself onto a flat rock to catch his breath. As he looked around, taking in the surreal beauty of the plateau, he realized something important. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Somewhere along the way, his connection to Naira had deepened, transcending the boundaries of species and circumstance. Whether it was trust, admiration, or something else entirely, he couldn't deny the pull she had on him. And judging by the way she watched him now, her galaxy-like eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and something softer, he suspected the feeling might be mutual. The plateau was unlike any place Arlen had ever encountered. The stones stood in perfect alignment, forming a ring that seemed to hum with latent energy. Each slab bore symbols carved deeply into its surface, swirling patterns that resembled constellations frozen in time. The faint glow emanating from them cast long, shifting shadows across the ground, making the entire scene feel alive. Above, the alien sky transitioned from twilight to a star-speckled expanse, the unfamiliar constellations twinkling with a rhythm that felt almost musical. Naira knelt beside one of the stones, her fingers tracing the glowing glyphs with reverence. "These are the markers of my ancestors," she explained softly, her voice carrying a weight that made Arlen sit up straighter. "They built this sanctuary centuries ago, when the Scarveth first began to roam unchecked. The plateau is protected by their wisdom, a force older than memory." Arlen leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "You mean magic?" Naira glanced at him, her multicolored eyes narrowing slightly. "Magic is a human word. What protects us here is balance. My people believe that every living thing has a spirit, and those spirits can harmonize, or clash. This place channels harmony. The Scarveth cannot enter because they disrupt the balance." Arlen raised an eyebrow. "So it's like a force field?" "In your terms, perhaps." She smiled faintly, standing and brushing her hands against her thighs. "But don't mistake simplicity for weakness. Balance is fragile. If it tips too far in either direction, even this haven could fall." The gravity of her words hung in the air, mingling with a gentle breeze that rustled through the sparse grasses dotting the plateau. Arlen stared at the stones, trying to reconcile the concept of balance with the raw power he sensed radiating from them. It was humbling, to say the least. Back on Earth, technology ruled supreme. Brute force and ingenuity were the cornerstones of survival. Here, though, the rules were different. Survival depended not on domination but on coexistence. He sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Guess I'll have to learn to play nice with the universe." Naira chuckled, the sound light and melodic. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you'll find that playing nice suits you better than you think." Her comment caught him off guard, and he shot her a questioning look. She merely smiled enigmatically before turning away, wandering toward the edge of the plateau. Curious, Arlen followed, joining her as she gazed out over the forest below. From this vantage point, the vast expanse of trees looked almost serene, masking the danger lurking within. "What happens now?" Arlen asked after a moment, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Naira crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. "Now we wait. The Scarveth won't venture near here, but they may linger at the edges of the plateau. Tomorrow, we'll decide our next move." "And what about extraction?" Arlen pressed, his tone tinged with unease. "My team will be looking for me soon. If I don't signal them, they'll send others," Naira finished for him, her voice steady. "But bringing more humans here won't solve anything. Your presence alone has already tipped the scales. Adding more outsiders would only worsen the imbalance." Arlen frowned, torn between duty and the growing realization that Naira might be right. He'd always followed orders without question, trusting that those above him knew best. But here, surrounded by the unknown, doubt crept in. Was blind obedience enough when lives, both human and alien, were at stake? Before he could dwell further on the dilemma, Naira spoke again, her tone lighter this time. "Tell me more about your world, Arlen. What is it like?" The sudden shift in topic threw him off balance, but he welcomed the distraction. "Well, it's Complicated. Beautiful in some ways, ugly in others. We've got cities that stretch higher than these trees and oceans so vast you can't see the other side. But we also fight, a lot. Over resources, ideologies, pride. Sometimes I wonder if humanity will ever stop tearing itself apart. Naira listened intently, her head tilted slightly as if absorbing every word. Sounds chaotic. Yet there's beauty in chaos, isn't there? Creation often arises from destruction. Arlen snorted. Easy for you to say. You don't have politicians arguing over whose fault global warming is while the ice caps melt. Her laughter surprised him, bright and unrestrained. Ah, yes. Politics. I imagine it's quite entertaining to watch from afar. Entertaining? More like frustrating, he grumbled, though he couldn't suppress a grin. Still, I guess it keeps things interesting. Their conversation flowed naturally from there, ranging from mundane topics like favorite foods. Arlen described pizza in such vivid detail that Naira declared she needed to try it someday, to deeper discussions about morality and purpose. Naira shared stories of her own people, describing rituals that celebrated the changing seasons and ceremonies that honored the spirits of the forest. She spoke of a culture rooted in respect for nature, where every action carried meaning and consequence. Listening to her, Arlen felt a pang of envy, not for her abilities or her glowing skin, but for the clarity of her worldview. Life on Earth felt messy and fragmented by comparison. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped, and Arlen found himself shivering despite the warmth of the glowing stones nearby. Naira noticed and gestured for him to sit closer. Reluctantly, he obliged, settling onto the ground beside her. Without warning, she placed a hand on his arm, and a wave of heat surged through him, banishing the chill instantly. "Whoa," he breathed, staring at her in astonishment. "Did you just—" "Shared energy," she explained simply. "A small gift. Consider it repayment for sharing your fire earlier." Arlen shook his head, laughing softly. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Naira's smile widened, her eyes sparkling mischievously. "You have no idea." For a while, they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Arlen felt a strange sense of peace settle over him, something he hadn't experienced in years. It was fleeting, he knew. Danger still lurked beyond the plateau, and decisions loomed large on the horizon, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All that existed was the cool night air, the ancient stones humming softly, and the woman beside him who seemed to embody the very essence of this alien world. Eventually, sleep claimed him, pulling him into dreams filled with shimmering lights and whispers of forgotten languages. When he woke hours later, disoriented and groggy, Naira was sitting cross-legged nearby, sharpening a thin blade with practiced strokes. Her gaze met his, and she offered a small, knowing smile. "Rest well?" she asked. Arlen rubbed his face, blinking away the remnants of sleep. "Better than I expected. Thanks." "Good," she said, rising fluidly to her feet. "Because today, we climb higher." "Higher?" he echoed, groaning inwardly. His legs still ached from the previous day's sprint. Naira nodded, pointing toward the distant peaks visible beyond the plateau. "If we're going to find answers, and solutions, we'll need to go where the spirits speak loudest. Are you ready?" Arlen hesitated, glancing at the mountains looming ahead. Something told him this journey wouldn't be easy. But as he looked back at Naira, her determination mirrored in her radiant eyes, he realized he didn't care. Whatever awaited them, he'd face it, with her by his side. The climb to the peaks was grueling, testing both Arlen's endurance and his resolve. The air grew thinner as they ascended, making each step feel heavier than the last. Naira moved with an almost supernatural grace, her glowing form a beacon against the stark landscape of jagged rocks and icy winds. She paused occasionally to wait for him, offering encouraging words that carried more weight than she likely realized. "You're stronger than you think," she said once, when he stopped to catch his breath on a narrow ledge overlooking a breathtaking valley below. "Your body may tire, but your spirit is resilient." Arlen chuckled dryly, leaning against the rock face. "Easy for you to say. You're not exactly human, remember?" Naira tilted her head, her eyes shimmering like liquid starlight. "No, I'm not. But neither are you entirely bound by the limits of your species. Look how far you've come already." Her words struck a chord deep within him. It was true, he had survived battles, endured hardships, and adapted to situations most people couldn't fathom. Yet it wasn't until now, standing beside Naira in this alien wilderness, that he truly felt alive. There was something about her presence that awakened parts of him he hadn't known existed, parts he didn't want to lose. As they reached the summit, the view took his breath away. A sea of clouds stretched out before them, broken only by the towering spires of distant mountains. Above, the sky blazed with unfamiliar constellations, their light refracting through the thin atmosphere into dazzling hues of violet and gold. At the center of the plateau-like peak stood another circle of ancient stones, similar to those they'd seen before but larger and etched with even more intricate carvings. "This is where the spirits gather," Naira explained, her voice hushed with reverence. "If we can commune with them, perhaps they'll guide us, to safety or to understanding." Arlen nodded, though skepticism lingered at the edges of his mind. Spirits weren't part of his worldview, but he trusted Naira implicitly. If she believed this place held answers, then he was willing to try. They approached the stones together, and Naira began a ritual unlike anything Arlen had ever witnessed. She placed her hands on one of the slabs, closing her eyes as she whispered in a language that sounded like wind chimes swaying in a gentle breeze. The symbols on the stone flared to life, pulsating with a soft, golden glow that spread outward, enveloping the entire plateau in warmth. Arlen felt it too, a tingling sensation that started at his fingertips and coursed through his veins, filling him with a strange sense of calm. Then, without warning, the ground trembled. Not violently, but enough to make them both stagger backward. From the horizon, a low hum grew louder, resolving into the unmistakable roar of engines. Arlen's heart leapt into his throat as he recognized the sound, his team's dropship. "They found me," he breathed, turning toward Naira. His relief was tempered by a sudden pang of fear. What would happen now? Would his superiors allow her to leave with him? Or would they see her as a threat, a variable they couldn't control? Naira met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "It seems your world has come calling." Before Arlen could respond, the dropship descended onto the plateau, its landing thrusters kicking up clouds of dust and debris. The hatch opened, and armed soldiers poured out, scanning the area with weapons drawn. Among them was Captain Rhea Solis, Arlen's commanding officer, her sharp eyes narrowing as she spotted him. "Was!" she barked, striding forward. "Report!" Arlen raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, though his focus remained fixed on Naira. "Captain, stand down. She's not a threat." Rhea's gaze flicked to Naira, her brow furrowing. "Explain yourself, soldier." "She saved my life," Arlen said firmly, stepping between them. "Multiple times. Without her, I wouldn't be here." Rhea hesitated, clearly torn between duty and trust. Finally, she lowered her weapon slightly but kept her stance defensive. "Who, or what is she?" "My name is Naira," Naira interjected, her voice calm but commanding. "I am a guardian of these lands. Your arrival has disrupted the balance here, but I do not seek conflict. Only peace." The captain studied her for a long moment before nodding curtly. "All right. Let's get back to base and sort this out there." Back aboard the dropship, tensions ran high. Arlen sat beside Naira, holding her hand tightly as they prepared for the journey ahead. He knew the road wouldn't be easy. Convincing the higher-ups to let her stay with him would require diplomacy, persuasion, and maybe a little defiance. But he also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't letting her go. When they arrived at the human colony planet designated as their extraction point, Arlen wasted no time advocating for Naira. He recounted everything: their escape from the Scarveth, the sanctuary of the plateau, the wisdom of the ancient stones. Slowly but surely, his words began to sway opinions. Even Rhea softened, admitting that Naira's knowledge of the alien ecosystem could prove invaluable for future missions. In the end, it was decided that Naira would remain under Arlen's protection, provided she agreed to share her insights about the planet and its dangers. To everyone's surprise, she accepted gracefully, her radiant smile lighting up the room. Over time, Arlen and Naira built a life together on the colony planet. They settled into a modest home surrounded by fields of hybrid crops and sprawling orchards, blending elements of both their worlds into their daily lives. Naira taught the colonists sustainable farming techniques inspired by her people's practices, while Arlen introduced her to Earth traditions like cooking over an open flame, though pizza remained her favorite dish. Their bond deepened with each passing day, culminating in a quiet yet heartfelt ceremony beneath the twin moons of the colony planet. Friends, family, and fellow colonists gathered to celebrate their union, marveling at the unlikely pair who had bridged two vastly different worlds. Years later, as they watched their children play in the fields, a mix of human curiosity and alien luminescence, Alan turned to Naira with a contented smile. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd find happiness like this. Especially not out here." Naira leaned into him, her eyes twinkling with galaxies. "Sometimes, the greatest journeys lead us to where we're meant to be." And as the stars above shone brightly, casting their light upon the thriving colony, Arlen knew she was right. Together, they had forged a new beginning, not just for themselves, but for all who dared to dream of harmony between worlds.